You will die behind bars. Judge sentences 14-year-old to life after murdering pregnant mother. The courtroom was silent, not the kind of silence that comes from respect. This was the silence of shock, of disbelief, the kind that makes your chest feel tight, like the air itself has turned heavy. 14-year-old Leah Moreau sat perfectly still in the defendant's chair. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her. No tears, no trembling, just stillness. The judge's voice cut through the room like a blade. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Someone sobbed. A man in the back row stood up and walked out, shaking his head. But Leah didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just stared ahead, at nothing, at everything. Her lawyer, a tired man named Mr. Evans, put a hand on her shoulder. She didn't react. Across the aisle, the BIM prosecution team exchanged quiet smiles. Prosecutor Linton straightened her blazer, nodding slightly. Justice, in her eyes, had been served. But not everyone was convinced. Rachel Kovach, a journalist who had been covering the case for months, sat in the third row with her notepad open. She had filled 17 pages with details, contradictions, questions that no one seemed willing to ask. She watched Leah's face, searching for something. Guilt, fear, relief. Anything. There was nothing. Rachel had seen killers before. Some cried, some screamed, some smiled. But Leah Moreau, she was a ghost in her own trial. The case had gripped the nation. A teenage girl accused of murdering her pregnant mother in cold blood. The media called it the House of Horrors. The tabloids ran with headlines like Monster in Pigtails and a Mother's Final Scream. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone knew she was guilty. Except Rachel wasn't so sure. The facts were brutal. Claire Moreau, 36 years old, 8 months pregnant, had been found dead in her bedroom. The coroner ruled it a violent attack. No weapon was ever found. No prints. No clear motive beyond what the prosecution painted. Jealousy. Resentment. A disturbed child who didn't want a sibling. Leah had been the only one home that night. She was arrested 3 days later. She never confessed. She barely spoke. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Witnesses described Leah as cold, distant, odd. Teachers said she was intelligent but emotionally detached. Neighbors said the house always felt wrong, even before the tragedy. The prosecution built their case on circumstantial evidence, psychological evaluations, and one damning piece of footage. Security camera video showing Leah entering her mother's bedroom at 11:47 p.m. The defense argued she was a traumatized child in a toxic home, that she had been failed by everyone around her. But the jury didn't buy it. And now, here she was, 14 years old, sentenced to die in prison. As the guards approached to take her away, Leah finally moved. She turned her head slightly, just enough to glance back at the gallery. Her eyes found Rachel's. For a moment, the two locked gazes, and then Leah spoke. Her voice was quiet, but clear enough to carry. They judged the wrong story. The guards pulled her to her feet. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Prosecutor Linton rolled her eyes. Mr. Evans closed his briefcase with a resigned click. But Rachel didn't move. She stayed in her seat, staring at the empty chair where Leah had been. They judged the wrong story. What did that mean? Rachel flipped to a blank page in her notebook and wrote 3 words at the top. What really happened? 6 months earlier. The Moreau house sat at the end of Maple Ridge Drive, a quiet street lined with oak trees and white picket fences. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved to each other in the morning and borrowed sugar on Sunday afternoons. The house itself was beautiful. 2 stories, pale blue shutters, a garden that bloomed in every season. Claire Moreau took pride in that garden. She spent hours trimming roses, planting tulips, making sure everything looked just right. From the outside, it was perfect. Rachel had spent the last 3 weeks digging through old records, interviews, and home videos submitted as evidence during the trial. She was trying to understand what life had been like before everything fell apart. What she found was a family that looked happy, but only on the surface. Claire Moreau had been a 3rd-grade teacher at Riverside Elementary. Her students loved her. Parents praised her. She volunteered at church fundraisers, organized school plays, and baked cookies for bake sales. When she announced her pregnancy, the community celebrated with her. But at home, things were different. One video stood out to Rachel. It had been recorded just 2 months before Claire's death. The footage showed a family dinner. Claire sat at the head of the table, glowing and radiant, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. She smiled at the camera. "We're so blessed," she said. "This baby is a gift." Leah sat at the far end of the table, barely visible in the frame. She was cutting her food into small, methodical pieces. She didn't look up, didn't smile, didn't speak. Claire glanced at her once, briefly, then turned her attention back to the camera. "We're going to be a complete family now," Claire continued. "Everything is finally falling into place." Leah set down her fork. For just a second, her jaw tightened. Then she stood up, excused herself quietly, and left the room. Claire didn't follow her. She didn't even pause. She just kept talking to the camera, her smile never faltering. Rachel paused the video and leaned back in her chair. Everything is finally falling into place. What did that mean, finally? She pulled up another file, a police report from a wellness check conducted 4 years earlier. A neighbor had called, concerned about shouting coming from the Moreau house late at night. Officers arrived, spoke with Claire, and found nothing alarming. Claire explained that Leah had been having nightmares and tantrums. Nothing unusual for a child her age. The officers left. The case was closed. But Rachel found a note buried in the file, handwritten by one of the responding officers. "Kid. Seemed scared. Wouldn't look at her mother. Kept staring at a locked door upstairs." A locked door. Rachel circled the words in red ink. She clicked through more files, more photos. The house always looked immaculate. Claire always looked composed. But Leah was always in the background. Always just out of focus. Always silent. In one photo, taken at a school event, Claire stood front and center with her arm around another woman. They were laughing. Behind them, barely visible near the edge of the frame, was Leah. She wasn't smiling. She was staring at something off camera. Rachel zoomed in on her face. There was something in her eyes. Not anger, not sadness, something else. Fear. Rachel closed her laptop and rubbed her temples. She had interviewed dozens of people who knew the Moreaus. They all said the same thing. Claire was wonderful. Leah was strange. The family seemed fine until it wasn't, but no one could explain why. No one except maybe Leah herself. Rachel opened a drawer and pulled out a small stack of photocopied pages, entries from Leah's diary submitted as evidence during the trial. The prosecution had cherry-picked quotes to paint Leah as resentful and dangerous, but Rachel wanted to read the whole thing. She turned to the first entry, dated 3 months before the murder. "Mom says the baby will change everything. She says we'll finally be a real family. I don't know what we are now." Rachel flipped forward. "She locked my door again tonight. She says it's to keep me safe." "Safe from what?" Another page. "I heard her on the phone. She was crying. She said, 'He can never know.' I don't know who she was talking about." Rachel's pulse quickened. "He can never know. Who was he?" She kept reading, faster now, scanning through weeks of entries. The tone shifted. The words became sharper, more desperate. And then, just 2 weeks before Claire's death, Leah wrote something that made Rachel's blood run cold. "She's not my mother anymore. She's someone else. And I think she's afraid of me now." Rachel set the pages down and stared at the wall. This wasn't the diary of a killer. This was the diary of a girl who was terrified. Rachel stood outside the Moreau house for the first time on a cold Tuesday morning. The property had been sealed after the trial, but she had gotten special permission from the county to walk through it as part of her investigation. The front door still had police tape across it, faded and peeling. She ducked under it and stepped inside. The air was stale. Dust floated in the shafts of light coming through the windows. Everything was exactly as it had been left 6 months ago. Furniture covered in fingerprint powder. Photographs still hanging on the walls. A vase of dead flowers on the kitchen table. Rachel moved slowly through the first floor, taking notes. The living room. The kitchen. Everything pristine, staged, perfect. like a showroom, but upstairs was different. She climbed the stairs, carefully, her footsteps echoing in the silence. At the top there were 4 doors: the master bedroom where Claire had died, a bathroom, a nursery, half-finished, painted in soft yellow, and at the end of the hall, a 4th door. It was smaller than the others, plain, no nameplate, no decoration. Rachel tried the handle. Locked. She frowned. She had been told the house would be fully accessible. She pulled out the key ring the county clerk had given her and tried 3 different keys before one finally turned. The door opened with a creak. The room was small, barely 10 feet across. A single bed pushed against the wall, a wooden desk, a lamp, one window with thin curtains that let in almost no light. No posters, no books, no color. It looked more like a storage room than a bedroom. Rachel stepped inside and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. This was Leah's room. She had seen photos of it during the trial, but being here in person was different. It felt wrong. She opened the desk drawer. Empty. She checked under the bed. Nothing. The closet held a few plain clothes on hangers. No shoes. No personal items. It was like no one had ever really lived here. Rachel noticed something odd. On the inside of the door, near the handle, there were scratches in the wood. Thin, deliberate marks. She crouched down and ran her fingers over them. They were tally marks. Dozens of them. Rachel's throat tightened. She pulled out her phone and took a photo. Then she noticed the lock. It wasn't just a regular doorknob lock. There was a deadbolt on the outside of the door, the kind you install to lock someone in. Her stomach turned. She stood and looked around the room again, this time with new eyes. The bed was pushed into the corner, as far from the door as possible. The window had a latch, but it was screwed shut. The walls were bare except for one thing, a small calendar hanging crooked on a nail. Rachel walked over and lifted it off the wall. It was from 4 years ago. Most of the days were blank, but a few had marks on them. Small X's in red ink. She counted them. 17. 17 days marked. No pattern she could see. Just random X's scattered across different months. She flipped the calendar over. On the back in pencil, someone had written 2 words. She knows. Rachel's pulse quickened. She took another photo and set the calendar down on the desk. She left the room and walked down the hall to the master bedroom. The door was already open. She hesitated before stepping inside. This was where Claire had died. The bed had been stripped. The carpet had been removed. But the room was still large, still bright. A walk-in closet. A private bathroom. Windows on 2 walls. Everything Leah's room wasn't. Rachel stood in the center of the space and tried to picture what had happened that night. According to the timeline presented at trial, Leah had entered this room at 11:47 p.m. The prosecution claimed she attacked Claire while she slept. The coroner estimated time of death between 11:45 p.m. and midnight, but the video had been cut, edited. It showed Leah entering, but not leaving. Why? Rachel walked over to the dresser and opened the top drawer. It was full of neatly folded clothes, maternity wear, soft fabrics, pastel colors. She opened the second drawer and froze. Inside, beneath a stack of scarves, was a manila envelope, unsealed. Rachel pulled it out carefully and looked inside. There were documents, legal papers, and a printed email. The email was dated 3 weeks before Claire's death. It was from a private boarding school in Vermont. The subject line read, "Enrollment Confirmation, Leah Moreau." Rachel's hands trembled as she read the message. "Dear Mrs. Moreau, we are pleased to confirm Leah's enrollment in our residential program beginning September 1st. As discussed, the program is designed for students who require structured support and benefit from separation from their home environment." Rachel stopped reading. Claire had been planning to send Leah away, permanently. She pulled out another document, a handwritten letter, unsigned, folded in half. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. "I can't do this anymore. She looks at me like she knows. I have to protect this baby. I have to protect myself. Sending her away is the only option." Rachel's chest felt tight. This wasn't a mother protecting her child. This was a mother afraid of her. She put the documents back in the envelope and slipped it into her bag. Technically, she shouldn't be taking evidence, but something told her this had never been shown to the defense. She left the master bedroom and walked back down the hall. She paused outside Leah's door and looked at the deadbolt again. Who sleeps separately isn't part of the family. That's what one of the trial witnesses had said, a former housekeeper. She had been dismissed as irrelevant, but Rachel didn't think so. Not anymore. Rachel sat in her apartment that night with Leah's diary spread across her desk. She had requested the full document from the court. Records. Not just the excerpts the prosecution had used, but every page. It had taken 3 weeks in a formal petition, but she finally had it. 147 pages, handwritten. Some entries neat and careful, others scrawled, barely legible like they'd been written in the dark. Rachel made herself a cup of coffee and opened to the first page. The earliest entry was dated nearly 2 years before the murder. Mom bought me this journal. She says writing helps you understand your feelings. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. Simple. Detached. The voice of a 12-year-old. Trying to follow instructions. Rachel flipped forward a few pages. Mom says I need to be more grateful. She does everything for me. She's right. I should be grateful. Then, a few entries later, sometimes I think she forgets I'm here. She talks to me like I'm a stranger, but then she hugs me and says she loves me and I don't know which one is real. Rachel underlined that sentence. The entries continued like that for months. A back and forth. Love and confusion. Gratitude and fear. Mom says I'm lucky to have her. She says other kids don't have mothers who care this much. She locked my door again. She says it's because I sleepwalk. I don't sleepwalk. I heard her crying last night. I wanted to go to her, but my door was locked. Rachel's coffee went cold as she read. The picture forming in her mind wasn't the one the prosecution had painted. This wasn't a resentful, jealous teenager. This was a child trying desperately to make sense of a mother who ran hot and cold. Then, about halfway through the journal, the tone shifted. The entry was dated 8 months before the murder. Mom told me today that she's pregnant. She was smiling. She looked happier than I've ever seen her. She said it's a miracle. She said everything is going to be better now. I asked if I could help with the baby. She said we'd see. Rachel turned the page. Mom moved me to the back room. She says the baby needs the room I was in because it's bigger and gets more light. She says I'll be more comfortable in the small room. She says it's temporary. It's been 3 weeks. She hasn't mentioned moving me back. Another page. She locks my door every night now. She says it's to keep me safe while she's sleeping. Safe from what? I asked her. She didn't answer. Rachel felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The entries became shorter, more fractured. Mom doesn't talk to me at dinner anymore. She talks to her stomach. To the baby, she says, "You're going to be perfect. You're going to be everything I needed." Am I not enough? She called me by the wrong name today. She said Emma instead of Leah. Emma was her sister. Her sister died when they were kids. She got angry when I corrected her. Rachel paused. She made a note. Look into Claire's sister. Emma. She kept reading. I don't think she sees me anymore. I'm just in the way. She told someone on the phone that I'm complicated, that I make things harder. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I did. I tried to be good today. I cleaned the kitchen. I folded the laundry. She didn't notice. The words were starting to break Rachel's heart. But then the entries took a darker turn. I had a nightmare last night. I dreamed the baby was born and Mom forgot I existed. When I woke up, I realized it wasn't a dream. It's going to happen. She told me today that I'll be going to a special school after the baby is born. She said it's a good opportunity. She said I'll make new friends. She wouldn't look at me when she said it. I looked up the school. It's not a school. It's a place where parents send kids they don't want anymore. Rachel closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Then she read the next entry. Mom loves me. Mom hates me. I don't know which is true. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Sometimes I think about running away. But where would I go? The entries near the end were the hardest to read. She doesn't call me by my name anymore. She just says you or her, like I'm not a person. I heard her on the phone again. She said once she's gone, everything will be better. I know she was. Talking about me. She's not my mother anymore. She's someone else. And then, 2 weeks before Claire's death, the entry the prosecution had used to convict Leah. I don't know how much longer I can do this. I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything is fine. Something has to change. Something has to break. The prosecution had read that in court and called it a confession of intent. But Rachel read it differently now. It wasn't a threat. It was a cry for help. She turned to the final entry, written the day before Claire died. She looked at me today like she was afraid of me. I don't know why. I haven't done anything. But she's scared. And that scares me because if she's scared, what is she going to do? Rachel closed the journal and sat in silence. This girl hadn't been planning to kill her mother. She had been afraid her mother was planning something far worse. Rachel spent the next morning tracking down people who had worked in the Moreau household. Babysitters, housekeepers, repair workers, anyone who had seen the family behind closed doors. Most refused to talk. Some had signed NDAs. Others just didn't want to be involved. But one woman agreed to meet her. Her name was Sandra Hewitt. She had been a part-time housekeeper for the Moreaus 3 years ago. She worked there for 6 months before Claire let her go without explanation. They met at a small diner on the edge of town. Sandra was in her 50s, thin with tired eyes. She stirred her coffee slowly, like she was buying time. I don't know what I can tell you that'll help, Sandra said quietly. Just tell me what you saw, Rachel said. Sandra was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Claire was particular. Everything had to be perfect. The house, the schedule, the way things looked. She was kind to me, polite, but there was something underneath, something hard. What about Leah? Sandra's expression softened. That poor girl. She was so quiet, always trying to stay out of the way. I remember once she asked me if I wanted help folding laundry. Just wanted to be useful, you know. Sweet kid. Did you ever see anything that concerned you? Sandra hesitated. She glanced around the diner, then leaned in slightly. The locks, she said, on Leah's door. I asked Claire about them once. She said Leah had night terrors, said she'd wander the house and it wasn't safe. But I never. You the girl sleepwalk, not once. Rachel made a note. Did Leah ever say anything to you? Not much. She barely talked. But one time I was cleaning upstairs and I heard her voice through the door. She was talking to herself, or maybe praying. I'm not sure. She said, please let her remember. Me? Rachel's chest tightened. Remember her? Sandra nodded. I thought it was strange, but I didn't ask. Wasn't my place. Why did Claire fire you? Sandra looked down at her coffee. I made a mistake. I unlocked Leah's door one afternoon because I heard her calling for help. She said she needed the bathroom. When Claire came home and found out, she was furious. Said I'd violated her trust, let me go the next day. Rachel leaned forward. Leah was locked in during the day too? Sometimes. Claire said it was punishment, timeouts, but they'd last for hours. Rachel felt sick. She interviewed 2 more people that week. A former babysitter named Grace and a neighbor named Mr. Townsend. Their stories didn't match. Grace described Claire as warm and loving. She adored Leah, Grace said, always talking about how proud she was. I never saw anything wrong. But Mr. Townsend told a different story. I'd hear shouting sometimes, he said. Late at night, couldn't make out the words, but it was angry, high-pitched. Could have been the mother. Could have been the kid. Hard to say. Did you ever call anyone? Rachel asked. Once. Police came. Didn't find anything. Claire was all. Smiles, said everything was fine. Rachel asked the question she'd been holding. Did it sound like arguing or something else? Mr. Townsend thought about it. It sounded like fear. Rachel sat with that answer for a long time. Rachel's next stop was Riverside Elementary, where Leah had been a student and Claire had been a teacher. She met with Mrs. Donna Freely, Leah's 6th grade homeroom teacher. They sat in an empty classroom after school hours, the smell of chalk and old paper hanging in the air. Leah was a bright student, Mrs. Freely said. Quiet but sharp. She always did her work, never caused trouble. Did she have friends? Mrs. Freely hesitated. Not really. She kept to herself. Some kids thought she was weird. Weird how? Just distant, like she was always somewhere else in her head. Rachel pulled out her notebook. Did she ever lie to you? Make things up? Mrs. Freely frowned. That's an odd question. The prosecution said she was manipulative, that she lied frequently. The teacher shook her head slowly. I wouldn't say that. But there was one thing. She paused, choosing her words carefully. A few months before everything happened, Leah started, telling people her mother was having a boy. Very specific. She told classmates the name would be Ryan. Was that true? No. Claire was having a girl. She'd announced it publicly. Everyone knew. Rachel made a note. Did you ask Leah why she said that? I did. She just looked at me and said, I thought that's what Mom wanted. It didn't make sense, but I let it go. Rachel underlined the phrase, I thought that's what Mom wanted. Anything else? Mrs. Freely nodded. She told one student that the baby wasn't her father's, said it so casually like it was a fact. The student told me, concerned. I brought it up with Claire. What did Claire say? She laughed it off, said Leah had an overactive imagination, but she looked uncomfortable. Rachel's pulse quickened. Did you believe her? Mrs. Freely looked away. I didn't know what to believe. Rachel spent the rest of the week digging through school records, incident reports, anything connected to Leah. She found 3 more instances of Leah telling strange, seemingly pointless lies. She told a classmate the nursery was going to be green. It was yellow. She told the school counselor that her mother was planning a big trip. After the baby was born, there was no trip. She told a substitute teacher that her family was moving to Pennsylvania. They weren't. On the surface, they seemed like random fabrications, the kind of thing a kid might say for attention. But Rachel saw something else. Every single lie was about the future, about things that hadn't happened yet, about plans. It was like Leah was testing reality, trying to see if she could change it by speaking it into existence, or trying to warn people in the only way she knew how. Rachel circled a phrase in her notes. She lied about the future because she knew no one would believe the truth about the present. That night, Rachel reviewed recordings of witness testimonies from the trial. One stood out. A school administrator named Mr. Voss had been asked about Leah's behavior. She lied frequently, he'd said on the stand. Small things, pointless things. It showed a pattern of deception. But when Rachel listened closely, she noticed something. The prosecutor had never asked why Leah lied, never asked what she lied about, just that she did. And that had been enough to paint her as untrustworthy. Rachel closed her laptop and stared at the wall. Leah hadn't been manipulating people. She'd been trying to make sense of a life that didn't make sense, and no one had stopped to ask her why. Rachel's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former co-worker of Claire's reached out through an anonymous email. The subject line was, simple, you're asking the wrong questions. They agreed to meet in a parking lot outside a grocery store. The woman wouldn't give her name. She was in her 40s, nervous, checking over her shoulder every few seconds. I shouldn't be doing this, the woman said. Then why are you? Rachel asked. Because Claire wasn't who people thought she was. Rachel waited. About a year before she died, Claire started acting strange, secretive. She'd take phone calls in her car. She'd leave school early for appointments she never explained. I asked her once if everything was okay. She snapped at me, said I was imagining things. Do you know who she was seeing? The woman hesitated. I saw her once with a man at a clinic across town. Rachel's pulse quickened. What kind of clinic? Medical. I don't know what kind, but she didn't see me. She was holding his hand. Can you describe him? Tall, maybe 50. Dark hair going gray, wore a suit. Looked important. Rachel drove to the clinic the next day. It was a private medical office in a professional complex. Discreet, expensive looking. She didn't go inside. Instead, she contacted a friend who worked in records retrieval. 2 days later, she had a name. Henry Marsh. Rachel ran a background check. Henry Marsh, 52, was a financial consultant. Married, 2 adult children. No criminal record. Clean profile. But there was a connection. Henry had been a client of Claire's husband's accounting firm 3 years ago. That's how they'd met. Rachel found a photograph of him online. A corporate headshot from his company website. Tall, dark hair going gray, exactly as the coworker had described. She kept digging. Security footage from the clinic's parking lot was long gone, but she found something else. Credit card. Records. Obtained through a legal request tied to the case. Claire had made several purchases at a boutique hotel downtown. Noon check-ins. Same-day checkouts. Rachel cross-referenced the dates with Henry Marsh's work calendar, publicly available through his company's newsletter archives. 3 of 3. The dates matched days he had been working remotely. Rachel sat back and exhaled slowly. Claire had been having an affair. And if the timeline was right, there was a very real possibility that the baby wasn't her husband's. Rachel pulled up the trial transcripts and searched for any mention of Henry Marsh. Nothing. He'd never been called as a witness, never been interviewed. His name didn't appear anywhere in the official record. Someone had kept him out of it. Rachel opened her notebook and wrote a single question. Did Leah know? She thought back to the journal entry. She said, he can never know. I don't know who she was talking about. Maybe Leah hadn't known who the man was. But she'd known he existed. And if Claire was afraid of someone finding out, Rachel's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging into Henry Marsh. You don't know what you're dealing with. Rachel stared at the screen. Someone was watching. Rachel didn't stop. If anything, the warning made her dig harder. She requested access to all video evidence submitted during the trial. It took another formal petition and 5 days of waiting, but eventually she was granted entry to the evidence. Room at the county courthouse. She sat alone in a small viewing room with a monitor and a stack of labeled USB drives. The most critical piece of evidence was labeled security footage, Moreau residence, night of incident. Rachel plugged it in and hit play. The video was grainy, black and white. Timestamp in the corner. It showed the upstairs hallway of the Moreau home. The camera had been installed by Claire 6 months before her death. She'd told neighbors it was for safety. Rachel watched the empty hallway. Nothing moved. Then, at 11:47 p.m., a figure appeared. Leah. She walked slowly. Down the hall, her face angled away from the camera. She was wearing pajamas, her hair was loose. She stopped outside her mother's bedroom door. She stood there for several seconds. Then she opened the door and stepped inside. The timestamp continued. 11:48 p.m., 11:49 p.m., 11:50 p.m. At 11:51 p.m., the video cut to black. Rachel frowned and rewound it. She watched again. The cut was sudden, unnatural. One frame, Leah was inside the room. The next, the screen was dark. She checked the timestamp. The next piece of footage didn't resume until 12:13 a.m., 22 minutes missing. When the video came back, the hallway was empty again. No one entering, no one leaving. Rachel paused the screen and leaned closer. She noticed something in the bottom corner, a faint flicker just before the cut, like the camera had been jostled or interfered with. She rewound again, frame by frame. There, just before the blackout for a single frame, there was a shadow, a shape moving near the camera itself. Someone else had been in the hallway. Rachel felt her heartbeat quicken. She took a screenshot and enhanced it on her laptop. The shadow was too large to be Leah. The angle was wrong. Someone had tampered with the footage. She checked the metadata on the file. It had been submitted by the prosecution as evidence, but the original source was listed as Moreau Home Security, retrieved by Detective Neil Cruz. Rachel made a note of the name. She requested the full digital file from the security company that had installed the camera. It took another 3 days and a formal subpoena, but she finally got it. The original footage was longer, much longer. Rachel's hands shook as she opened the file. The video played as before, Leah entering the room at 11:47 p.m., but this time, it didn't cut. At 11:52 p.m., Leah stepped back out of the bedroom. She was crying. Her hands were shaking. She stood in the hallway for a moment, then turned and walked quickly back toward her own room. At 11:54 p.m., another figure appeared. A man. He came from the stairwell, moving with purpose. He looked directly at the camera for just a second, then pulled something from his jacket. The screen went black. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She rewound and paused on the man's face. It was blurry, but recognizable. Henry Marsh. Rachel sat frozen in her seat. Leah had entered the room, but she'd left before her mother died. Henry Marsh had been there, and someone had edited him out of the video before it was given to the defense. Rachel pulled out her phone and called the detective listed in the case file. Detective Neil Cruz answered on the third ring. "This is Rachel Kovach. I'm investigating the Leah Moreau case." There was a pause. "That case is closed. Not for me. I need to ask you about the security footage you submitted. The video from the hallway." Another pause. Longer this time. "I submitted what I was given." "By who?" Silence. "Detective. Someone edited that." "Footage? Removed 22 minutes, removed a second person." "I don't know what you're talking about. Henry Marsh was in that house the night Claire Moreau died, and someone made sure no one knew." The line went quiet for a long moment. Then Cruz spoke, his voice low. "You need to be very careful, Ms. Kovach. Is that a threat?" "It's advice." He hung up. Rachel stared at her phone. The video didn't lie, but someone had made sure the jury never saw the truth. Rachel needed to understand Leah, not the version presented in court, but the real person beneath the headlines. She reached out to Dr. Alan Rosner, the forensic psychologist who had evaluated Leah before the trial. He'd been hired by the defense, but his testimony had been inconclusive. The prosecution had used that ambiguity to their advantage. They met at his office in the city. Dr. Rosner was in his 60s, gray-haired with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through people. "I remember Leah," he said quietly. "I think about her often." "What did you see when you evaluated her?" Dr. Rosner leaned back in his chair. "Contradiction. She was intelligent, articulate, emotionally controlled, but there was something underneath, something she wouldn't let me access." "Did you think she was guilty?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't deal in guilt or innocence. I deal in patterns, and Leah's patterns didn't fit." "What do you mean?" "Most juveniles who commit violent crimes show clear behavioral markers. Aggression, lack of empathy, impulsivity. Leah showed none of that. What she showed was something different." "What?" "Survival instinct." Rachel leaned forward. "Explain." Dr. Rosner pulled a file from his desk. "During our sessions, I gave her several psychological assessments. Rorschach. Standard protocols. Her responses were cautious, like she was testing me, trying to figure out what I wanted to hear." "You think she was manipulating you?" "Maybe. Or maybe she'd learned that giving the wrong answer had consequences." He opened the file and pulled out a drawing. "I asked her to draw her family. This is what she gave me." Rachel looked at the image. It showed 3 figures. A woman, tall and smiling. A small figure in the corner, barely sketched. And between them, a dark, scribbled shape. "What is that?" Rachel pointed to the dark shape. I asked her the same thing. She said, "The space where I used to be." Rachel felt a chill. She wasn't drawing her family as it was, Dr. Rosner continued. She was drawing it as she felt it, and in her mind, she'd already been erased. "Did you tell the court this?" "I tried, but the prosecution framed it differently. They said the drawing showed resentment, detachment, evidence of a disturbed mind." "What did you think it showed?" Dr. Rosner closed the file. "A child who'd been emotionally abandoned long before the crime ever happened." Rachel asked the question that had been haunting her. "Do you think she did it?" Dr. Rosner looked at her for a long moment. "I think Leah Moreau is one of the most controlled individuals I've ever evaluated, and people that controlled don't lose control without a reason. So if she killed her mother, it wasn't impulse. It was a decision. But every time I sat with her, I kept coming back to the same thought." "What thought?" "The look in her eyes." He paused. "It wasn't the look of someone who'd taken a life. It was the look of someone who'd lost one." Rachel felt the words settle heavy in her chest. "There's something else," Dr. Rosner said. He pulled out another document. "I requested Leah's medical records as part of my evaluation. There were several visits to the ER over the years. Bruises, A fractured wrist? A concussion? Abuse? Claire always had explanations. Leah fell. Leah was clumsy. And Leah never contradicted her. Why not? Because she'd learned not to. Rachel took a slow breath. Did you include this in your report? I did. The defense tried to use it. But without Leah confirming abuse, it was circumstantial. And Leah refused to say anything against her mother. Even after everything? Dr. Rosner nodded. Even after everything. Rachel left his office with more questions than answers. Leah hadn't acted like a killer, but she also hadn't acted like a victim. She'd acted like someone caught in between, someone who knew far more than she was willing to say. And that terrified Rachel most of all. Rachel's next lead came from an unexpected place. A retired court reporter named Margaret Chen reached out after reading one of Rachel's articles online. She said she had something that might matter. They met at a coffee shop near the courthouse. Margaret was in her 70s, small and precise, with the kind of sharp memory that comes from decades of transcribing every word spoken in a courtroom. I worked the Moreau case, Margaret said. I was there for the preliminary hearings, before the trial. What do you remember? Margaret pulled a small notebook from her purse. I kept my own notes. Personal observations. Things that didn't make it into the official record. She opened the notebook and pointed to an entry dated 3 months before the trial. There was a video deposition, recorded 6 weeks after Claire's death. It was submitted by the defense, but the judge ruled it inadmissible, said it was prejudicial. Rachel's pulse quickened. A deposition of who? Claire Moreau. Rachel stared at her. Claire was already dead. I know, but the video was recorded 2 months before she died. It was part of a separate legal matter, a custody consultation. Custody for Leah? Margaret nodded. Claire had been meeting with a family lawyer, discussing options for Leah's future. The lawyer recorded the session as standard procedure. Rachel leaned forward. What did she say? I can't remember word for word, but I remember the tone. Claire was calm, composed, but she said something that stuck with me. Margaret flipped a page. She said, if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Rachel's stomach dropped. She said that? Yes. And then she said, I've made decisions people won't understand, but I did what I had to do. Did she say who she was afraid of? Margaret shook her head. No, the lawyer asked, but Claire refused to elaborate. She just said she knows more than she should. Rachel felt the pieces shifting in her mind. She was talking about Leah. That's what I thought. But the defense tried to argue the opposite, that Claire was afraid of someone else, and Leah was the witness. Why was it ruled inadmissible? The judge said it was speculative, that it could unfairly bias the jury without context. Rachel clenched her jaw. Do you know where the video is now? Margaret hesitated. Technically, it should be in evidence storage, but I heard it was removed. By who? I don't know, but I remember the prosecutor fought hard to keep it out, said it was a distraction. Rachel left the coffee shop and went straight to the courthouse. She filed a request to access the video deposition. It took 2 days to get a response. Request denied. Evidence no longer in storage. Disposition unknown. Rachel called the family lawyer who had recorded the session. He was retired, living upstate. He agreed to talk. I remember that meeting, he said over the phone. Claire was conflicted. She wanted to protect her unborn child, but she was also terrified. Of Leah. She never said that directly, but she kept saying, I can't let her ruin this. I can't let the truth come out. What truth? She wouldn't say. But she asked me about legal options for removing Leah from the home, boarding schools, emancipation. She even asked about involuntary psychiatric commitment. Rachel's blood ran cold. For a 14-year-old? She said Leah was dangerous, but she couldn't give me specifics. Just fears. Paranoia, maybe. Do you still have a copy of the video? There was a long pause. I kept a backup, against protocol, but something about the case felt wrong. I didn't want it to disappear. Can I see it? Another pause. I'll send you a link, but if anyone asks, you didn't get it from me. The video arrived in Rachel's inbox that night. She opened it with shaking hands. The footage showed Claire sitting in a lawyer's office. She looked, tired, older than her years. Her hands rested on her pregnant belly. The lawyer's voice came from off-screen. "Mrs. Moreau, can you explain why you're seeking these options?" Claire took a breath. "I love my daughter, but I can't trust her anymore." "Why not?" "Because she knows she's always known. And I'm afraid of what she'll do with that knowledge." "What does she know?" Claire looked directly at the camera. "That I'm not who I say I am." The video ended. Rachel sat in the dark, her mind racing. Claire hadn't been afraid Leah would hurt her. She'd been afraid Leah would expose her. Rachel couldn't let it go. "I'm not who I say I am." What did that mean? She started digging into Claire's past. Birth records, employment history, school transcripts, anything that might reveal who Claire Moreau had been before she became the perfect teacher, the perfect mother, the perfect victim. What she found didn't add up. Claire's records before age 22 were thin, almost non-existent. No high school yearbook photos, no childhood medical records. Her social security number had been issued when she was 21, which was unusual but not impossible. Rachel found a marriage certificate. Claire had married at 23. Before that, there was a name change petition filed in a county 2 states away. Claire Moreau had once been Claire Ann Beckett. Rachel traced the name back further, and that's when she found it. A news article from 26 years ago. Local family tragedy. Girl 10. Survives sister's drowning. The article described an incident at a lake. 2 sisters, ages 10 and 8, had gone swimming unsupervised. The younger sister, Emma, had drowned. The older sister, Claire, had survived and called for help. The investigation ruled it an accident. But Claire had been questioned. Witnesses said the girls had been fighting earlier that day. Claire had told police she tried to save Emma, but couldn't reach her in time. The case was closed. Rachel sat back, her hands cold. Claire had changed her name, started over, built a new life where no one knew about Emma. But Leah had found out. Rachel remembered the journal entry. "She called me by the wrong name today. She said Emma instead of Leah." And the note from the trial. She vit. And she remembers. Leah hadn't just stumbled onto a secret. She'd become a mirror of Claire's past. Rachel pulled up the boarding school documents again. The enrollment form had been signed 3 weeks before Claire's death. But there was something else in the file Rachel had missed before. A psychological evaluation request. Claire had scheduled an appointment for Leah with a private psychiatrist. The reason listed: concerning behavior, possible early onset personality disorder. The appointment was set for 2 days after Claire died. Rachel's stomach turned. Claire had been building a case, not to protect Leah, to get rid of her. Rachel found more. Emails between Claire and the boarding school. Administration. In one, Claire wrote, "I need her removed from the home as soon as possible. She's becoming a threat to my family's safety. I'm afraid of what she might do." The school had responded with concern, asking for documentation. Claire had replied, "I'm working with a professional to establish a psychological profile. Once that's complete, I'll have everything you need." It was a setup. Claire had been preparing to have Leah declared unstable, dangerous, and once that label was attached, Leah would have had no say in her own future. Rachel kept digging. She found a draft email in Claire's deleted files, never sent. It was addressed to her husband. "I can't do this anymore. She looks at me like she knows what I did. I see Emma in her eyes. I have to protect this baby. I have to protect myself. Sending her away is the only option. You'll understand when I explain everything." Rachel's hands trembled as she read the last line. "I should have been more careful. I should have made sure she never found that box." What box? Rachel went back to the evidence logs from the crime scene. There, a small wooden box had been found in Leah's room, catalogued as personal effects. It had been dismissed as irrelevant. Rachel requested access to the physical evidence. When she opened the box, she found a stack of old newspaper clippings, all about Emma Beckett's drowning, and underneath them, a handwritten letter. The handwriting was a child's, uneven, careful. "Dear Mom, I found, these in the attic. Is this why you don't like me? Because I remind you of her? The letter was dated 8 months before Claire's death, right after Claire found out she was pregnant. Rachel closed the box slowly. Leah had discovered the truth, and Claire had decided that truth was too dangerous to let live. Rachel's article went live on a Friday morning. She didn't reveal everything, not yet, but she laid out enough to raise questions. The edited video, the buried deposition, Claire's name change, the boarding school plan. By noon, her inbox was flooded. Most were messages of support. Some were threats, and one was different. It came from an anonymous email address. No subject line, just a single sentence and an attachment. You're closer than you think, but you're looking at the wrong person. The attachment was a scanned image of a handwritten note. Rachel opened it. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. The paper looked old, creased from being folded many times. It read, "She saw, and she remembers. If he finds out, we're all finished." There was no signature, no date, but Rachel recognized the handwriting. It was Claire's. She compared it to other documents she'd collected. Letters, forms, the email drafts. It was a match. Rachel stared at the note. She saw, and she remembers. Claire had written this, but who had she written it to? And who was he? Rachel replied to the anonymous email. "Who sent this to you?" The response came an hour later. A neighbor found it in her mailbox 2 days before Claire died. She was too afraid to come forward during the trial, but she kept it. Rachel typed quickly. "Can I speak to her?" "No, but I can tell you this. Claire wasn't afraid of Leah. She was afraid Leah would tell someone what she knew." Rachel's pulse raced. "What? Did Leah know?" The reply took longer this time. That the baby wasn't her husband's, and that Claire had been lying about a lot more than that. Rachel sat back, her mind spinning. She thought about the boarding school, the psychological evaluation, the name change. Claire hadn't been protecting herself from Leah. She'd been protecting a secret, and Leah was the only one who could expose it. Rachel went back through everything she had, the affair with Henry Marsh, the pregnancy, the timeline. If Claire had been planning to pass the baby off as her husband's, but Leah knew the truth, then Leah wasn't just a problem. She was a threat. Rachel pulled up phone records she'd obtained through a legal request. In the 2 weeks before her death, Claire had made 17 calls to the same number. Rachel traced it. It belonged to Henry Marsh. She cross-referenced the call times with Claire's. Text messages recovered from her phone. One message stood out, sent to Henry 3 days before she died. "She knows. I don't know how, but she knows. We have to do something." Henry's reply, "Stay calm. I'll take care of it." Rachel's stomach dropped. She scrolled further. Another message from Claire sent the night before she died. "I told her she's going away. She didn't react. I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm scared." Henry's reply came an hour later. "I'm coming over tomorrow night. We'll figure this out." Tomorrow night. The night Claire died. Rachel checked the timestamp. Henry had sent that message at 10:32 p.m. The security footage showed him arriving at 11:54 p.m. He'd been there, and he'd made sure no one knew. Rachel opened a new document and started writing. She listed every piece of evidence, every contradiction, every lie. Claire had been planning to erase Leah from her life, but someone else had gotten to Claire first, and Leah had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe, Rachel paused. Maybe Leah had seen exactly what happened, and had chosen to stay silent. But why? Rachel looked at the note again. She saw, and she remembers. If Leah had witnessed the murder, why would she protect the killer? Rachel spent the next week trying to get someone in law enforcement to listen. She called the prosecutor's office. They refused to comment. She reached out to Detective Cruz again. He wouldn't return her calls. She contacted the public defender's office that had represented Leah. They said the case was closed, and they had no resources to reopen it. Every door was shut. But Rachel didn't stop. She filed Freedom of Information requests. She contacted legal advocacy groups. She reached out to a retired judge who had a reputation for fighting wrongful convictions. And slowly, She started to piece together why no one wanted to touch this case. Prosecutor Amanda Linton had built her career on the Moreau trial. After securing Leah's conviction, she'd been promoted. She was now running for district attorney. Her campaign ads featured a photo of her leaving the courthouse the day of the verdict, confident and victorious. Tough on crime, tough on justice. Rachel dug into Linton's background. She found something buried in an old case file from 5 years earlier. Linton had been reprimanded, quietly, internally, for withholding evidence in a domestic violence case. The defendant had been convicted, but the conviction was later overturned when it was discovered that Linton had suppressed witness testimony that contradicted her narrative. She'd been given a warning, nothing more, and she'd done it. Again. Rachel requested the full discovery file from the Moreau case. It took a court order, but she finally got access. What she found made her sick. Buried in the file was a psychiatric evaluation of Claire, conducted 6 months before her death. Claire had been seeing a therapist for anxiety and paranoia. The therapist's notes described Claire as increasingly unstable, obsessive, and fixated on control. One entry stood out. Patient expressed fear that her daughter is watching her. States she feels unsafe in her own home. Discussed possibility of inpatient treatment, but patient fused. The evaluation had never been shown to the defense. Rachel kept reading. There were also text messages between Claire and her husband that had been excluded from evidence. In one exchange, Claire's husband had written, "You're being paranoid. Leah is just a kid." Claire's response, "You don't see the way she looks at me. She knows I'm lying. She's going to ruin everything." Her husband replied, "You need help, Claire. This isn't normal." None of this had been presented at trial. Rachel also found a reference to a witness who had been interviewed but never called to testify. A former student of Claire's, a girl named Bethany Park. Rachel tracked Bethany down. She was 19 now, living 2 towns over. They met at a park. "I tried to tell them," Bethany said quietly, "but no one wanted to listen." "Tell them what?" "That Ms. Moreau wasn't who everyone thought she was." Bethany looked down at her hands. She was nice in front of parents, but when it was just us, she was different. Different how? Mean, controlling. She'd humiliate kids who didn't do things her way. She had favorites and everyone else was invisible. "Did you see her interact with Leah?" Bethany nodded. "Once, at a school event. Leah was helping set up chairs and she put one in the wrong spot. Ms. Moreau grabbed her arm and yanked her aside. She smiled at everyone else like nothing happened, but I saw Leah's face. She looked terrified. "Did you tell the police this?" "I tried. I gave a statement, but I was never called to court. When I asked why, they said my testimony wasn't relevant." Rachel felt rage building in her chest. "Why do you think they didn't use it?" Bethany looked at her. "Because it didn't fit their story." Rachel went back to the prosecutor's office. This time, she didn't ask. She demanded. She walked into Amanda Linton's office unannounced. Linton looked up from her desk, surprised, then annoyed. "Ms. Kovach, you can't just—" "You buried evidence," Rachel said. "You suppressed witness testimony. You hid Claire's psychiatric records. You knew she was unstable, and you let a 14-year-old girl take the fall." Linton's expression hardened. "That case was built on facts. It was built on lies. You need to leave. Henry Marsh was in that house the night Claire died, and you made sure no one knew." Linton stood up. "You're making baseless accusations." "Am I?" Rachel pulled out a folder and dropped it on the desk. Edited security footage, buried depositions, suppressed evaluations. You didn't want justice. You wanted a conviction. Linton stared at the folder but didn't touch it. "Get out of my office." Rachel didn't move. "You built your career on a child's life, and you know she didn't do it." Linton's jaw tightened. The jury decided. The jury was lied to. For a moment, something flickered in Linton's eyes. Guilt, fear. Rachel couldn't tell. Then it was gone. "If you print any of this, I'll sue you for defamation." Rachel leaned forward. "Try." She left the office and walked straight to her editor. "I'm running the full story," she said. "Are you sure?" Rachel nodded. The justice system didn't fail Leah Moreau. It chose to. Rachel hadn't spoken to Leah since the trial ended, getting approval to visit her in Nahau. Prison took weeks, but eventually she was cleared. The facility was gray and cold. Rachel waited in a small visiting room with a table bolted to the floor and a guard standing by the door. Then Leah walked in. She looked older, thinner. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was blank. She sat down, across from Rachel, and folded her hands on the table. She didn't speak. "Thank you for seeing me," Rachel said. Leah didn't respond. Rachel pulled out her notebook. "I've been investigating your case. I found things that weren't shown at trial, things that change everything." Leah's eyes flickered, but her expression didn't change. "I know about Henry Marsh. I know he was there that night. I know the video was edited." Still nothing. Rachel leaned forward. "Leah, I can help you, but I need you to tell me what really happened." Leah finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, steady. "Why?" Rachel blinked. "Why what? Why do you want to help me?" "Because I don't think you killed your mother." Leah's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Everyone else does." "I'm not everyone else." Leah looked at her for a long moment. Then she leaned back in her chair. "You think if you find the truth, it'll matter, but it won't. It will. I have evidence. I can reopen your case." "And then what?" Leah's voice was calm, too calm. "They'll apologize? Let me go? Give me my life back?" Rachel hesitated. "That's what I thought." Leah looked away. "You need a story, Ms. Kovach. I just need silence. I'm trying to give you justice." "Justice?" Leah's eyes snapped back to hers, sharp, cold. "Justice is what put me here." Rachel felt the power shift in the room. "Did you see him?" she asked quietly. "Did you see Henry Marsh kill your mother?" Leah didn't answer. "Why are you protecting him?" Leah's jaw tightened. "I'm not protecting anyone." "Then tell me what happened." Leah stared at her. For the first time, Rachel saw something break through the mask. Pain. "She was going to erase me," Leah said softly. "Send me away, make me disappear. She told me that night, said I didn't belong." "Anymore?" Rachel's chest tightened. "I went to her room to beg her not to tell her I'd be good. I'd stay quiet. I'd be whatever she wanted." Leah's voice cracked, just slightly. "But she wouldn't even look at me." "What happened next?" Leah's eyes grew distant. "I left. I went back to my room. I heard voices shouting. Then, nothing." "You didn't see who else was there?" Leah's expression closed off again. "I saw what I needed to see." "What does that mean?" Leah stood up. The guard moved forward. "It means some people get to walk away, Ms. Kovach, and some people don't." She turned toward the door. "Leah, wait." Leah stopped but didn't turn around. "If you find him," she said quietly, "it won't change anything. The story's already been written." She walked out. Rachel sat alone in the visiting room, her mind racing. Leah knew. She'd seen something, heard something, but she wasn't talking. And Rachel realized something that made her blood run cold. Leah wasn't protecting Henry Marsh. She was protecting herself. From what, Rachel didn't know yet. But she was going to find out. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She went back through everything. Every document, every timeline, every lie. And then she saw it, the piece she'd missed. Henry Marsh had been at the house, the video proved it. But there was something else in the footage Rachel hadn't paid attention to before. The timestamp. Henry arrived at 11:54 p.m., but the coroner's report estimated Claire's time of death. Between 11:45 and 11:50 p.m., Henry had arrived after Claire was already dead. Rachel's heart pounded. She pulled up the full security footage again, the unedited version. She watched Leah enter the room at 11:47 p.m. She watched her leave at 11:52 p.m., crying. And then, at 11:54 p.m., Henry appeared. But there was something else, a shadow, movement in the stairwell before Henry arrived. Rachel enhanced the image. A third person had been in the house. She cross-referenced phone records, credit card transactions, everything she had on Henry Marsh. And then she found the final piece. A phone call made from Henry's cell at 11:39 p.m., the night of the murder. to Claire's husband. Rachel's blood turned to ice. She pulled up the husband's alibi. He'd claimed he was out of town on business. Hotel receipts, witness statements. But Rachel checked the metadata on the hotel check-in. It had been done remotely, online.